Number 4.
Education, Food in Schools Amendment Bill, first reading.
Mr. Speaker.
I call David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Education, Food and Schools Amendment Bill be read for the first time. I nominate the Education and Science Committee to consider this bill. Sir, this bill came about some time ago, a couple of years ago actually, when I was visiting a number of schools, and the schools that I visited had children there that had come to school without food and certainly were not doing as well as they could have done. And as a result of that, we drafted this bill and we put it in, and it was drawn out. Unexpectedly, of course, because nobody expects their bill necessarily to be drawn out. I took this and reapproached the schools and what was happening, and visited a number of schools, visited hospitals, health practitioners and many others. As a result of those visits, I believe that I didn't get it right. And as a result of that, I believe that this bill needs to be substantially changed. But what I do believe is that it needs to go to the Select Committee, because the lessons we can learn from this bill are ones that have a profound impact on New Zealand. I want to mention two of the schools that I visited that made me rethink what I believed was the right thing to do, which is to introduce food in schools. Iandara is a Decile 1A school in Otara. It is, in a sense, comes from the poorest area anywhere in New Zealand. They rely on fruit in schools. They receive, or about to receive, milk from Fonterra, and yet their kids, all of them bring a lunch to school. All of them bring a lunch to school, and as a result of that, what we're seeing is kids that are healthy, bright-eyed and willing to learn. And I asked this school, what is it? What have you done that enables you to ensure that your kids are well fed, but the kids down the road are not? And what the school told me was basically they worked with the community, they worked with families, they enabled those kids to have the food and the sandwiches and whatever they needed to bring to school to be augmented with some of the other the fruit and the milk as well. And then they had the kids at lunchtime sitting down and the teachers moving around to make sure that actually their families were providing sandwiches. And sometimes they were just Marmite sandwiches, but nevertheless they were something that the kids were bringing. And if they didn't, the school would help them out on an emergency basis and then go back to the parents and ask what it was that was happening. That was Iandara. I'll come back to that in a minute. The second school that I visited was Owaraka, a school, Decile 2 school in my electorate. This is a school that relied on a program called Garden to Table, which some of you may have heard about, which is an organisation which helps schools grow vegetables, fruit trees in their schools, and then helps them not only to garden and learn how to garden, but also to make sure that those same vegetables and that same fruit goes into a kitchen, and every week they make something from the food that comes out of their own gardens. So what I saw in those schools, to me, told me that there is a better way of being able to look at the whole issue of providing food in schools in a different way that will provide long-term and sustainable change. I want to say one other thing about both of these schools. Both of these schools ban fizzy drinks out of the classroom, out of the schools. All of them without exception, and these goes to many other schools that I visited, all of them believed that that was detrimental to their kids' health, along with everything else that tuck shops serve up. That 9 teaspoons of sugar in a can of Coke was not going to do their kids any good in terms of their health or their concentration, and when they took those drinks out, the concentration of those kids improved. Sir, the interesting thing about Iandara in Otara is that the public health nurse, when she visited, found that there was less skin infections. The dental health nurse found that there was less cavities in the kids' teeth, that the kids were less heavy than comparable kids down the road, in the sense they were less overweight, and in effect what was happening was not just about feeding the kids in schools, but it was teaching them about good nutrition and making them and their families healthier. And so this is what this bill is really about. I recognise, of course, in some cases we're going to have to ensure that children do get fed, otherwise they'll leave the biggie left behind. But I don't want to take parents' responsibility away from their responsibility, which is to ensure that their kids grow up. Because that's not what we are trying to do in terms of ensuring and guaranteeing a long-term and sustainable solution to our problems. It's simply fixing the solution today. And there's an old Chinese proverb that everybody's probably, I'm sure, has heard about, that give a person a fish and you'll feed them for a day. Give a person a fish, teach a person how to fish, and they will be able to be self-sufficient for their entire lifetime. You will be feeding them for their entire lifetime. And that is really what I'm talking about with this bill. Sir, what I would like to see is what I observed before I came into Parliament, what I observed in many of the aid operations that I was involved in. And I remember in particular in Somalia, feeding 30,000 children under 5 who had to be starving in order to get into our program. They had to be less than 80% weight for height than what they should be. Those kids came in, and when they came up to 100%, they were checked out. They were discharged from the program. The idea is that feeding children in that environment is an emergency situation, not a prolonged situation which will ensure that and guarantee that there will be dependence. So with this bill, what do I want to do with it? I believe, and it's not like a politician to accept that they've not necessarily got it right, but I don't think I got it right with that first bill. And what I do want to do is to see that this bill goes through to the Select Committee. Because I believe that the stories of those schools that I spoke about, Iandara, Owairaka, and many, many more, have something to gain to New Zealand as a whole from coming before us and sharing their experiences. I don't want to impose, and I don't want to see imposed on schools a diktat from on high saying, you must do this, you must teach nutrition, whatever. What I want to see is that these schools and other schools that would like to follow in the same direction have the opportunity to access the resources and the money that will enable them to run programs like the ones in Iandara and Owairaka. That they apply to perhaps the Ministry of Education to how do you run a garden to table program? How do you connect with the local community so that the local community is about sharing and ensuring that their dietary habits change along with the children that they're sending to the school? Those are the sort of things that I want to see come up. There are so many benefits that can arise from replicating what we have seen in those two schools and many others around the country and applying them much wider across the board. Instead, we are doing the same things over and over, expecting things to change. We have the third highest obesity rate in the world, behind the USA and Mexico. If we don't change the way that we do things, it will cost us billions in taxpayer dollars. We cannot afford to have a society where obese and overweight children, grow into unhealthy adults and cost our health system so much in our taxes. So, sir, I want to see us move away from feeding as an emergency interaction, and I want to know that schools can access, if they want to, a more sustainable, self-reliant and healthy program, and they can have the resources to do it. Food in schools should be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but not the remedy to the overall problem. I do not want to see kids to be dependent, families to be dependent on a feeding program. What I want to see is, rather than an institutionalised program of feeding, I want to see an institutionalised way of looking beyond that and teaching the long-term, lifelong skills that will enable kids not only to be able to be better fed, but to have better nutrition, better health for the rest of their lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.